Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us for our second edition of Web Streaming Basics with Vision2. My name is Lee Carpenter. I kind of help oversee sales and technical for lighting, video, and control products here at Vision2. So the process of what we're going to do today and the agenda, I guess, is we're going to go through a few slides that are going to kind of get you a basic overview understanding of what streaming is, why you want to use it, who's using it, some tools to help you use it and get set up pretty quickly. As you can see on the table, I've got a little sprinkling of product here. All of this is stuff that I'm either using right now or stuff that I'll be talking about in the slides, and pretty easy to set up. So starting in, I'm just going to go ahead and flip over to the slides right here. So give me 1 second, and we'll get started. So if you have any questions or comments or anything, please feel free to use the Q&A button on the bottom of the window. And the chat window is available, but if you could keep everything in the Q&A section because we can archive it. And then at the end of this, I will be sending out all of these slides and then another little packet of information that I have and also the video recording. So getting started again, my name is Lee Carpenter. I oversee lighting, video, and control products here at Vision2 Marketing. If you don't know what we are an independent manufacturer's rep firm. We represent all of these lines here in the Southeast, and we also cover Florida for a number of lines as well. So the basic agenda for today is going to go through kind of split sessions. I'm going to go through session one, which is mainly going to be slides. And as mentioned, I'm going to cover the why of stream, why you want to do it, who's doing it, some statistics, signal path, source to delivery. So going over what you can use as a source, what qualifies as a source, how you get it captured, how you get it over the internet, and how you get it to delivery to your audience. Some audio considerations, which audio is always important in a stream. No matter what you're doing with it, you always want to make sure that you're doing it well with audio. Encoding, what is an encoder? What does encoding mean? Different ways that you can encode video and audio. And then on the delivery section, we'll go through connectivity. I'll give you some basic understanding of what bandwidth, bit rates, all that type of stuff are, why they're important, who recommends what settings for YouTube and Facebook and all these other different platforms and such. And then we'll have a little Q&A session. After that, we'll jump over into session two, which is all hardware based. So I'll go back to cameras and show you all the different types of hardware that I'm using. Everything from as simple as IP and USB cameras. We'll step up to kind of a medium setting, which is sort of what I'm using here, kind of a medium setup that has some out-based cameras, some hardware encoders, running a video switcher. And then we'll go into large and scalable, which will kind of include what I'm doing, but leave it open-ended so you can have infinite number of cameras, infinite number of viewers and things. And then at the very end, I'm going to go through a very simple basic setup of what I'm doing and show you how to get that onto YouTube and to Facebook, because right now I feel like those are the two most popular and most recognized platforms. And then at the end of that, we'll go through Q&A. So what I'll do on the Q&A section, I'll go through the first section and answer that. And then same thing on session two, and try to, if I see some stuff pop up, I'll try to answer those as I'm going. So why do you want to stream? Streaming has exploded in popularity over the past few years. I moved here from New York about 7 years ago, and I had a company in New York that one of our primary businesses was streaming. Everything from corporate meetings, MTV shows, comedy shows, things like that. It was a very, very, very popular platform in that city, being as big as it is, because there was always something going on, always something happening, and you didn't want to have to pay for a gigantic camera crew to always be present with a television truck and try to put everything, broadcast level quality to television. Sometimes it's great to have that digital content, and it helps a lot of brands, a lot of houses of worship, a lot of bands build a content library that's much easier to access by their fan base, and it's a lot less expensive to get it online and get it produced. So these are just statistics, and these will be in the handout that I'll hand you, but really useful information to start understanding what streaming is, why streaming is important. The next thing is signal path. How exactly is streaming done? So obviously you got to start with video content, whether that is live content that you're capturing with a camera, or whether that is pre-recorded video content that you're playing back and sending over a stream. And a lot of the things that you're probably seeing right now during this pandemic are kind of a hybrid of both. Some things are live interviews and such like that you may see on the Today Show that are happening in real time. Some of these other ones that you're seeing that are some of the larger like music streams that are going on, a lot of those have been pre-recorded and they're just rolling back that content at a predetermined time to make it seem as though it's live as well. So from your video content, you have to be able to capture that, and that's what an encoder does. There's different ways that things are encoded, which I'll go through in a minute, but an encoder can be something as simple as a mobile device or something as large and, cumbersome as a actual hardware encoder, which we also will show you what that is as well. But everything has to have from content to be encoded. And we'll go through the process to show you what encoding does, but you'll see why that's obviously an important step. So from encoding, you obviously are going to send that content somewhere, right? So it's either going to go to a network. When I say network, I'm saying an inter-building network. So you're sending that content maybe somewhere around a campus or somewhere around a church or a large venue, or you're sending that out through computer to software to be sent out to the internet. So the thing about both of these is that they're kind of interchangeable as to their destination, right? So you can send things from an encoder to a network that may stay within a building mainframe, but you also can link that and send it out to the world through the internet, right? Same thing with an encoder that may be going through a software platform or through a computer. You may want to send that to YouTube or Facebook, but you also have the ability to send that as an H.264 feed throughout a building and receive it with a decoder in a gymnasium for an overflow room or something of that nature. So there's a lot that you can do with encoded video, and I'm going to show you how you can get that around to the places that you want people to see it. So source to delivery. A source can be anything that captures video. That can be a mobile device, a webcam, a DSLR, a video camera, and a switcher. A source is just the actual camera or the object that's capturing or playing back the video. That's all that means. When you have those sources, whether it's playback or whether it's live, again, it has to be captured. With a mobile device, they kind of serve a triple function. They are a source, they're the capture device, but they also can be your decoder as well because they can receive video and watch it through YouTube, right? So a mobile phone really does a lot of functions and helps you to be able to understand the signal flow. A computer can also be a capture device, which I'll show you that here in a second because that's actually how I'm broadcasting to you guys today. An independent capture device, which is, when I say capture device, I'm qualifying that as a simple video or audio capture device, typically over USB or Thunderbolt, but it requires a computer in order to be able to get out to the world. And then also an encoder. An encoder device, the difference between an encoder device for me and a capture device is an encoder is standalone and can connect directly to a network and does not need a computer in order for it to operate. A capture device will require a USB or a Thunderbolt connection and a computer in order for it to be able to use the video to be encoded and be sent out into the world. Encoding. We'll go through exactly what the definition is in encoding, but these are just some of the more popular codecs that you're going to see and hear about. H.264 is the big boy on the block. It's been out for a long time. It does compress video really well, and it's compressing that video down into a smaller format that just allows it to be sent over a network at a lot lower bandwidth than standard raw video. H.265 is the new version of H.264, uses less bandwidth, better picture. And there's a lot of other different types of encoders out there as well that are, some are proprietary from Adobe and some are proprietary from Apple, but these are the most common that you'll see available. And delivery. So delivery, as mentioned, can be something as simple as a decoder, which is a hardware decoder located in a building that can receive an H.264 stream, something that's been done for decades in the security camera, CCTV world. Most security cameras that you see are cameras with an IP output that are sending H.264, and they're being received by a decoder box, and that allows them to be recorded individually. Streaming websites, YouTube, Facebook, Twitch, all these that we'll talk about. Mobile devices, as mentioned, those can also be a decoder because they can receive video. Certain apps, and then also servers and self-contained, which is meaning that there's an ability for server platforms and typically used on websites by bands and things like that want to put up a paywall in order to have private viewing and charge people for that experience to come to their website. That's what I mean by server and self-contained. So this kind of gives you the source to delivery signal flow of streaming, what's required, how it's delivered, and a lot of the keywords that you'll see in this whole process. So moving over to sources, this is just some writing that I have on here. So when I send you these slides, you can have a little bit of a definition and understand what it is. But basic sources are mobile devices and IP and USB cameras. Again, mobile devices are kind of a 3-in-1. So it has capture, encoding, and decoding all built into one unit. IP and USB cameras work kind of the same, but they have a little bit of a difference between the two. Both cameras are able to take raw video, capture them, and then encode them at the object, so at the camera itself. An IP camera can actually send that encoded video directly to the internet. A USB camera requires that you have a computer or something in place to take that video and send it to the platform that you want it to be distributed by. These are a few of the different cameras in these categories that we sell at Vision2 Marketing, and a couple of these I'm actually using right now. So on the HDMI, HDSDI section, those are just basic cameras, HDMI, HDSDI output. They don't have USB, they don't have network, and those would require an additional capture device or an additional encoder in order for them to be able to get on the internet. All right. USB cameras, as mentioned, you can take a USB feed, go into a computer, and then go right into Zoom if you want to, or into YouTube or into Facebook. Network cameras, kind of the same thing. They can capture directly at the camera. However, they can go directly to a network and go directly out to the internet without having to have a computer in place. Capture and encoding. So the process of capturing and encoding is the process by which the video is captured on the device. And when it's captured, you're taking raw video content and you're encoding it. And what encoding it is doing is it's compressing that video down from raw video, which eats up a considerable amount of hard drive space and bandwidth, and getting it into an encoded codec that allows you to compress that video with the audio and get it down to where it can be sent over the internet very easily and not eat up a lot of bandwidth. And the reason you want to have the ability to encode that is because you have no idea how people are going to be watching things on the other end of this, who your audience is going to be, and how they're going to be watching this. So in a perfect world, you're sending encoded video to somebody that has a hardware decoder that's going to show it on a gigantic, LED wall or a projection screen. Well, that's not reality, because 90% of the people that watch streaming events are watching it on a mobile device. So you want to have the ability to make sure that whatever you're encoding and however you're encoding it fits a multitude of recipients, no matter what their bandwidth speed is, no matter what their device is, right? So capturing is the process of receiving the raw video and converting it into a digital format to be encoded or recorded. Encoding is the process of taking that captured video and converting it into a format, which we call a codec, that can then be streamed and recorded. And again, just going over the two differences between USB capture and a normal encoder. A USB capture device requires a computer device in order to encode the video. An encoder can capture the content, but has a network connection and can take it directly to the internet. These are a couple of different variations of those two types of capture devices and encoders that I mentioned. On the USB side, these are just a few selections that we have. Typically, when you see a USB capture device, it's going to be HDMI or HDSDI, and you always want to have a USB capture device that has the ability to give you an external or an auxiliary audio input. The reasoning why, which I'll go over a lot more in detail later, is that when you get into certain types of streams, you don't want to have to assume that all the audio and everything is going to be mixed and done from one person who's switching video. You want to have the ability in a larger scenario to say, hey, I'm the video guy, I'm running my stream. They have an audio front of house engineer. Let me get a feed from him because he can mix it better than I can, since there's 10 people on stage playing instruments and I need to focus on doing a good video switch. So always when you go into a USB capture device, or a Thunderbolt one for that matter, make sure that you have one that has an auxiliary external input. On the network side of these encoders, these are a few different models that we have, and I'll show you several of these. We have something from as simple as a simple HDMI, HDSDI input to a network output, to ones that have recording built into them, so you can connect a hard drive or a thumb drive or an SD card, and you can sync a recording to your stream, or you can record and stream asynchronously, so you can do it independently of each other. And then at the bottom, you can see there's a video switcher there. We have a great setup through Data Video that has a number of different types of broadcast switchers that actually have encoders built into them. So you kind of kill two birds with one stone. You have the ability to do all your video switching and graphics and stuff in a great platform, but you also can hit a button and immediately stream what you're doing. So a lot of flexibility with the Data Video products here that I'll show you guys. The other way that you can do encoding is through software. This is a product that we don't sell at Vision2, but I support it and I've used it for many, many years. That's called Wirecast. It's made by a company called Telestream. And the reason that I'm a big fan of this is because one, you almost always have a computer with you on site somewhere. Number two, it doesn't always require an encoder to get stuff into the software. If you have an IP camera, if you have a webcam on your computer, you have the ability to take this software and get stuff onto the internet and stream it. The other cool thing I like about it is you can do graphics and overlays and bottom thirds naming and stuff like that pretty easily. And the last reason I like it is that it cuts out the headache of understanding what all different types of settings you need for different streaming platforms. Companies like Wirecast and other companies that do what they do as far as streaming software go through the trouble of finding all of the perfect bit rates and bandwidths and settings for all these different websites, and they build it into their software. So when you go into this software platform like this, you can say, hey, I want to stream to YouTube, and it automatically pops up what they consider to be the best settings in order to stream to YouTube. And it's not a trial or error or something that they throw at you. This is stuff that they actually research and do work on to say, hey, we've done our due diligence. This is what we recommend that you stream and how you stream. So all useful pieces of gear, and all available to consumers now, where it used to be very expensive to get this type of hardware. Talking about audio real quickly, which we'll go into a little bit more, but audio is something that's very important, and it's often overlooked by people when they do streaming. They just consume that they're just going to get a stereo feed from a front of house engineer, that they'll just be able to plug in a microphone or something, and it doesn't always work out that way. So the thing to think about, and the reason I put this in here, is to kind of make everybody pause and understand that there's numerous methods to get audio into a stream. Something as simple as using the microphone on your computer, all the way up to having a full-blown front of house mixer that has the ability to send you a USB or a network feed over Dante or something, and how you can intermingle that to get it into your stream. I've been discussing with one of my friends this week who is a front of house engineer for an artist, and he has amazing wealth of audio gear. And once you have the ability to have the front end of the audio for an artist or a church or venue, if you have the ability to encode it properly, it's always going to sound infinitely better than the stuff you see on the internet. I think everybody's worst nightmare is they go online and they see an artist in their living room with an acoustic guitar, and the microphone's 15 feet from them, and you can't hear a damn thing that they're saying or understand anything that they're trying to do. So you want to make sure that everything is mic'd properly, run properly, and able to be mixed properly. And sometimes that includes getting somebody else to mix your audio so you can do a good job on the video switch. These are a couple of different devices that we have that can do great things for you on the audio side. On the USB side, we have a couple of just really inexpensive, run-of-the-mill analog consoles that can give you a USB output. We have the Node. We have another one called the Signature Series from Soundcraft. And in the bottom left corner of the USB, the blue one is the UI-24, which is kind of our rack mount digital mixer. That's what I'm using right now to speak with you guys to. And it allows you to do a number of great things. It has numerous inputs. It has a lot of outputs. You can use it like a regular mixer with an iPad or a network connection, but it has USB out as well. So you can do multi-track recording and multi-track mix output, which is, again, the way that I'm getting out to you guys right now. On the right side, we have also a number of digital consoles that are large format that have the ability to do network output. So let's use Dante, for example, since it's kind of the big boy on the block as well. You can take a VI console, which has Dante natively, take Dante out into a computer, and through Dante sound card on a Mac, you can receive that, or through a PC, you can receive stereo channels of Dante through Dante sound card, and then also join those with your encoder or join those with your Telestream or Wirecast software and stream out that as well. So you can keep the workflow for audio really easily without having to have a huge XLR split and all types of stuff like you normally would do to do a broadcast recording. Delivery. So I'm not going to go through this super in depth because I've already kind of talked about a lot, but just kind of giving you some definitions and some understanding. A codec, as I mentioned, is it's just a piece of software that compresses and decompresses software, raw video that allows you to send it over to the internet. And there's numerous different types of codecs. The most popular ones that we will talk about and that we'll use and I'll show you is H.264 and H.265. Really, the main difference between these two is H.264 taps out at 1080. H.265 can go into 4K, and it's done a little bit better on the compression of what it's doing to video and to audio. An audio codec, these are the most popular audio codecs that you will see in streaming. Everybody understands what an MP3 is. So that's kind of the big boy in the block as far as streaming. The most popular one that you will see in general for audio codecs is called AAC. It's basically the same quality as an MP3, but it gives you a much lower bit rate. And the thought process behind that is that you have a lower bit rate on the audio side, so it doesn't take any of the bandwidth away from the video. So you try to keep it where the video has the most of the bandwidth that it's eating up. FLAC is a lossless streaming codec platform that some people do try to use it, but you really need to have a lot of bandwidth in order for it to be able to work because it's taking almost raw audio, compressing it very, very little and sending it over the internet. And then on the G.711A is one that I throw out there because you may see it sometimes. And what that is it's an old codec format that was typically used for VoIP or voice over IP telephone systems. And it's not used a lot, but you'll see it sometimes in some IP cameras because IP cameras came from a CCTV or security camera world, so you may see it. These are streaming protocols, and what the streaming protocol is it's the way by which the codec is being sent through a network or through the internet to be viewed or be received on the other side. So the thing to know about streaming protocols is what they're actually doing is they're packaging all this information, right? So it's taking a codec from video, a codec from audio, packaging it together and sending it out as what may be an RTMP or an RTSP stream. So what that means on the other side, though, is that you don't necessarily have to have an RTMP decoder or an RTSP decoder on the other end to be able to receive that video, because there's other types of streaming protocols that can decode those types. So for instance, I may be sending an RTMP stream out, but I may be receiving that stream with an Apple HLS or an HTTP stream through a website. So there's different ways to receive that streaming protocol than you can send it. And the reasoning behind that is because not everybody has the ability to have a RTMP decoding device in their studio or in their facility. Sometimes they're using an internet platform to decode that stream to be able to view it, right? So through YouTube, for instance, you're sending that out as an RTMP. You're not viewing it on YouTube as a RTMP because they're using Flash or HTML5 or something like that to deliver it. So just think about that when you go into this. A lot of streams will require that you send them RTMP or RTSP because it's secure and they can decode it very well and they can make sure that the package stays whole when it goes across the internet, but you're not always going to view it in that world as well. And this is just a signal path by which showing how things are through the capture and decoding process. So when you capture things, again, you're using a camera, a capture device, an encoder, software, and then it's taking that content and coding it into one of these various formats for the video and the audio, and then it's packaging that information and sending it through the stream as an RTMP, RTSP, or whatever method that you're using. And then on the other side, you're decoding that information, and you can do it through a variety of different ways: a hardware decoder, a website, a mobile device, or a server, or something else like that. So here is probably the most important frame or most important slide that I have in the entire program that I showed everybody. This is what I get calls or questions about. What is this? What does this mean more than anything? So I'm going to run through these really quickly just so you have a basic understanding of what these are. And these are all related to video for the most part, except the audio sample rate. So resolution. What is resolution? Resolution is the distinct number of pixels horizontally and vertically that a picture gives you. So when you hear 1920 by 1080, that means that there's 1920 pixels wide by 1080 pixels tall, right? So 720p, there's various different resolution bases that make up what people call HD, UHD, standard definition, different things like that, which we'll go over in just a second. So resolution is the number one factor that you have to take into account when you start streaming. If you want to stream in HD, typically anything that what we call HD is 720p and above. So 720p is considered HD, 1080 is considered true HD, and then we go up from there. Frame rate is also very important because frame rate is the number of single images that are shown in a second. So when you're recording video or you're showing video, you will have, let's say it's 1080 at 30 frames or 60 frames. The lower the frame rate, the slower the video is being captured, or the less of the video content is being captured. When you see a lot of cinematic stuff, it's typically being recorded at a 24 frame, 23:9:7 frame, because it gives it lets the light seep in a lot differently. It lets the image be captured a lot differently, and it looks a lot more cinematic typically when you're shooting in a 24p. When you are in a setting where you may be showing graphics or real high level content, a lot of people want to use a faster frame rate because it captures more of the content or more of the actual frame. So a lot of people shoot in 1080 at 60 frames. Well, the higher in the frame rate you go, it's capturing more information of the picture. Thereby, it's making your requirement for bit rate and bandwidth greater. So the higher the resolution you go and the higher the frame rate you go, the more bit rate and the more bandwidth is required, okay? So what is a bit rate? A bit rate is the amount of the video data that is being captured or encoded. So you have your resolution, you have your 1080 at 60 frames, and then when you're selecting your bit rate, what you want to take into consideration on bit rate is, I want to be able to make sure that my audience sees this picture as clearly and as perfectly as I possibly can. That means that I may not always be able to send it out at a super high bandwidth because I may have people watching this again on a cell phone on a wireless connection and not sitting down somewhere with a hardwired fiber connection. So you kind of play both ends of the stick. You want to be able to show them the best content, and you want to be able to deliver to them properly, but you also don't want to overload their system where they can't see it, because it's just going to make the video choppy and it's not going to allow it to come through clearly to them. So bandwidth is the other portion of this triangle. Bandwidth is the amount of data network capacity required to transmit video content. So I have my resolution, I have my frame rate. Those are things that I need to determine. What determines how much of that and how well it is captured through my capture device is determined by bit rate. how much of that, how fast that goes, and how big that content package is going out to the internet is how much bandwidth that I need. So I'll go over some settings here in the next slide that kind of give you an understanding of how all three of these things kind of play together, or four of these things kind of play together in order to deliver content properly. Audio sample rate is the last one that I'll go over. So the sample rate defines how many times per second sound is sampled. So just like with audio, the more that you sample in a second, the higher the sample rate's going to be, the more bandwidth that it requires. So most people want to deliver audio at a higher sample rate, obviously. So you just got to take into that consideration that the more you sample, the better the sample is, the more bandwidth you're going to need. And it's also got a parallel with the amount of bandwidth that video is requiring as well. So these are some basic standard bit rate recommendations that I like to err on the side of more is best. So I don't want to go in and give you the bare minimum. So these are what I would consider the absolute, middle of the road that I would consider bandwidth settings for any type of stream that I'm doing. So what you'll typically see these is when you're going into YouTube, or you're going into your encoder settings, you're going to be able to start seeing these in the settings of this, and it'll say, okay, your resolution is 1080, your frame rate is 30 frames. Now, what bit rate do you want to set for this? So you don't want to set something that's so high of a bit rate that it's capturing all the video as it's being shot and sending it out, unless you have a really solid connection and it's going to maybe a hardware decoder on the other end. Or you don't want to set it so low to where if somebody takes that 1080 signal that you're sending them and they're viewing it on a cell phone or a computer and they blow it up to a big screen, it's going to look choppy and crappy. So you got to keep middle of the road with everything. I start with 360p and go all the way up through 4K. The reason I start with 360p is because there's a lot of software that will allow you to do what's called a primary and a secondary stream. Your primary stream is what is typically going to be viewed by everyone, and then they will allow you to input information for a secondary stream, which is typically a reduced resolution, a reduced bit rate, a reduced frame rate that allows them to send that to people that may just be mobile users or may be just viewing it through, a computer or another type of device. So kind of keep those in the back of your mind. These are recommended bit rates from some of the popular websites. And if you just kind of glance over this a little bit, you may notice that there's a lot of variation between these, right? So for YouTube, it's saying that you need between 4,500 and 9,000 kilobytes per second. And then on the same thing from Facebook, which I have full HD on there, it's saying that you only need 4,000 kilobytes. So why are there variations between all these? You would think that one would be good for the other one, right? Well, a lot of these websites are able to receive full HD streams or even 4K streams, but that doesn't mean that that's how they're delivering them. So for instance, when you go to YouTube, up until recently, when you sent them a 1080 stream, they were only broadcasting it out online as a 720p image. So that was as good as you could get. So what would happen a lot of times is if you were sending them a 1080 image and you were going out into an audience, you were getting weird imagery because you're sending them certain types of content and certain levels of bandwidth and frame rates, and then they were downgrading it and taking it to where you were not allowed to send it at the full frame rate and send it at the full resolution. So it would make the image slurry. It would make the image choppy. It would do weird things with the audio and stuff. So keep that in consideration when you go into these things. You want to look at the end platform that you're using, YouTube, Facebook, any of these, and say, okay, not only do I want to know what my recommended bandwidth, my recommended bit rate is, but what are they actually broadcasting in? Are they broadcasting this in 1080? If not, you may not need to send them 1080. You can just send them 720p. So a lot of things to consider there. these are some of the bit rates for the different types of codecs that I mentioned, H.264, H.265. And you can see between these two different platforms and between the two different frame rates, how much bandwidth, or excuse me, bit rate can be varied, right? So it requires a lot heavier of a bit rate to get 60 frames than it does 30 frames from a lot of these. It's almost double in most cases. So think about that when you're trying to show this audience. So if your audience is, you know, you're shooting a concert in somebody's living room and you're going out to an audience, do you really need 60 frames? It's probably going to look better if you shoot it in 30 frames or 24 frames because it just looks a lot more cinematic. Think about those things when you go into your setup and your stream output. Considerations. So this is just a list of a few different things that are kind of my, make sure you do these, look over these, will save you a lot of trouble. And this is just my fallback list that I give out kind of to everybody. So, excuse me, on the network side, always have your encoding devices hardwired to the network or internet connection. If Wi-Fi is your only connection, see if you have the ability to set up a private network with dedicated bandwidth. With Wi-Fi specifically, especially in places, if you live in New York or San Francisco, or ever been to those areas on tour or anything, you know that 2.4 gig and 5 gig are everywhere in New York City. It is not easy to get a good signal with Wi-Fi anywhere in New York City unless you have a router or an antenna right beside you. So think about that when you're going into places. And you also have to think about that not just for the way your setup is, you also have to think about it with other people in the building. So if wireless, if you know 2.4 gig Wi-Fi is your only solution and you're using the building Wi-Fi and they have 3,000 people in there on a guest internet connection, is that bandwidth that all these people Instagramming the concert the entire time, is that going to impede on your level of bandwidth for output for your stream? Things you need to think about. Mobile, wired, or Wi-Fi. If you're using a mobile device, you always want to check your connection speed and make sure that, if possible, again, you're on a private network that can be viewed, or excuse me, that can only be accessed by you and your mobile device. Wired, try to get a dedicated or dry connection directly to the modem. If that's possible, great. If not, it's understandable if it's not, because you may be going to a lot of corporate scenarios or things like that where you're dealing with an IT team and they're like, no, you're not getting into, you can't have a hardware connection or it's just not physically possible. But going into where you need a wired connection, especially in a corporate setting, you want to become buddies with the IT department. You want them to know that you need their help and you're going to try to make things as easy as possible. And if you go into them asking for these types of things on the front end, they'll typically be able to help you out, especially in a large building or a corporate or like a hotel or something like that. You always want to make buddies with the IT guys and come in immediately and say, I need a hard connection with no firewall settings. If a lot of times they'll ask you for a MAC address or something for your computer so they can log you in and give you all the bypassing that you need through their network. You want to make sure to tell them what platform you're using, and if you know what ports you need open and available, because a lot of times these network engineers, they close these ports off so people can't do certain things inside the building as security precautions. So it's things to think about while you're getting your setup done, and also on the front end of this on the planning side. A couple of cool little pieces of software that everybody should have and everybody should use. Speedtest.net is just a very simple and easy website that you can go and hit on the internet from a laptop or from a cell phone or something that's inside of a building, and it just tells you what your upload and download speed is. So you want to always be able to check and make sure not only is your download speed really high, your upload speed needs to be really high, because if you're streaming, you're obviously uploading stuff. So that connection needs to be really solid. The other thing that I use a lot is a software platform from a company called SolarWinds. It's called SolarWinds Network Traffic Generator. I believe it's about $150, $200, but it's basically a package of 60 different types of software that allow you to do speed test, bandwidth, stress test. So it can take a network and put a lot of bandwidth on it in packages and stress and see if it can handle the amount of traffic going over the internet. So that's very, very useful, especially in integration world where you've set up a network, maybe in an existing building or something, and you want to make sure that your network is not being impeded by the building's network, or if you set up a VLAN to be specific for streaming, that it's not getting leaked network traffic and things like that. Encoding devices. I'm not going to go through all this very in depth, but just kind of give you an understanding of the way that I would check into things and make sure things are set up. IP cameras, you always want to make sure you have a hardware connection. Most IP cameras are PoE, so you want to make sure if you're using a switch or it's going through a switch, you get good power to it. Outboard monitoring. Most PoE cameras have the ability to do outboard monitoring, meaning that you have a hard video connection output on the camera, HDMI, HD, SDI. You want to always have the ability to view an IP camera remotely or individually from most IP cameras are set up through a web-based interface. So you want to have the ability to view that video outside of having to have a computer. And then keep the firmware updated. You'll hear me say this a lot over the next few things. Always keep firmware updated. It's one of the biggest calls that we get for service issues. Computers, hardwired connection, Wi-Fi, private networks. Reboot your computer before starting. Especially with PCs, you never want to get into a situation where you've got your stream set up, you've been working on it all day, you got your graphics and everything, and then you're like, okay, I'm ready to stream, and then your computer pops up 10 minutes before you go to air that says, hey, we have a Windows update, we need to do this right now. Bam, you're a blue screen and it's stuck for an hour. Don't get caught in that situation. When you get your stream set up, and I'm talking night before, day before, or that morning, way before you have to go to show or go to air, get your stuff set up, save everything, reboot your computers, and then only turn on the software that you need in order to do the stream. Everything sucks power out of your computer. Everything sucks processing speed. So only use the software that you need in order to do the stream, right? Test your software limits. When you're doing software-based encoding and streaming, like with Wirecast, for instance, it works really, really well on a computer by itself. When you start turning on a lot of devices that work with Wirestream, such as they have a piece of software that does titling or does graphics for you, when you use those two pieces of software together, it sucks a lot of processor speed and it makes things very slow in your computer. So you want to make sure if you're using things like that together on a stream off of one computer, turn those pieces of software on, set them up how you're going to use them, save whatever graphics and whatever shots and whatever connections you're going to do, and make sure that it runs solid. Do a test stream, get people on the other side of the line, make sure your audio is good, make sure it's not being choppy, things like that. And then keep your software and your operating system updated. As mentioned, same thing with Macs. They do the same thing all the time, pop up and they say, hey, I've got a brand new operating system. Let's upgrade it now. Bad time. Encoders, update firmware, update firmware, update firmware. The number one service issue or calls that we get about hardware encoders is directly related to it needing a firmware update. So always keep all your gear updated for firmware. And then with the encoders and with all of this, always carry doubles of your connection cables in various lengths. Cat 6, USB 2.0, 3.0, USB-C, audio cables, HDMI, HD, SDI. I think if you're a good tech, a good install guy, a good field engineer, whatever, I think everybody has a bag of cable or connectors or adapters that they carry with them. Always make sure you carry multiples of these, and always make sure that you carry them in different genders and then also different lengths. I always carry like a 3-footer and a 10-footer if I can, or something at least that long so I can get into various spots. And make sure if you're using things, like HD, SDI or audio cables that may be going out to somebody not in your video world, that you're giving them the cable that they need, so you're not dependent on them to run you the cable. So if I'm going to go to my front of house engineer and say, hey, can you give me a stereo line? I'm going to carry 50-foot XLRs with me to make sure that he can get his signal to me without him having to stop what he's doing and worry. Try to make it as trouble-free for anybody else as possible. Last but not least, a UPS. I'm a firm believer in battery backup systems across anything, especially in integration world, but even in show world. A lot of people do this already, but if you have a streaming network or a streaming system set up, digital consoles, this, that, and the other, the last thing you want is to have a power flinch, a generator have a hiccup or an issue, run out of gas, whatever the case may be, and all these computers turn themselves off or go into battery without you knowing it. So always have a UPS that gives you, 30 minutes or an hour to get power to it in order to be able to back up your system. The worst things that happen, especially if you're an audio guy, you know this, the things that take the longest time in the world to reboot audio consoles, computers and things like that, or something that you don't want to have go down in the middle of the show. A 60-second console reboot will seem like 3 hours when you're in the middle of a show and an audience is staring at the front of house engineer. So always have a UPS and a backup system. Audio, I'm not going to go through all of this stuff. It's super in depth. It's kind of things that we've already talked about, but just kind of a review. Audio, always know your audio source. And this talks about mobile devices, how sometimes you may not want to just use the microphone on a mobile device. You may want to connect an outboard microphone, and how you're able to also utilize to save some time and some space and some hardware with USB and IP cameras. A lot of times they'll have an audio input with them that will allow the audio input to be embedded with the video on the output stream. So things to think about. Lighting is a very key element, and I won't go super in depth with it, but I think it's important enough to understand and know why you need it. You always need key lighting, and key lighting is front lighting that you put on people's face. And I'm going to switch over to my video input so you can see. So what I have facing me are actually intelligent lights that are specifically made for key lighting. So what that means is that they have settings that allow it to be a variable white. So I can make it a really, really cold white or a really, really warm white. For me personally, I like to have my settings somewhere between 3,500 and 5,000 Kelvin. It's a very middle of the road setting that makes it where it's warm enough for good skin tone, but it also makes it where it's not super cold, where, especially for me, if you don't have a good tan, it doesn't make you look like you're under fluorescent lights. The thing you got to think about this is in this setting as well, you don't know in a lot of these situations when you're streaming what your who your presenters are going to be and stuff. So if you have somebody that looks like me compared to somebody that may be from so South Africa or Morocco that has darker skin, you want to have one lighting setting or preset that can cover those different skin tones, right? So think about that when you go into lighting. It's very, very important and always something to know what you want. The secondary thing is think about depth as well. So right now I have key lighting. Behind me, I just have some simple par cans that are hitting this black drapery behind me to give some dimension. So you have a little bit, it looks a lot more like a set. You know that the wall is behind you, but you're not blending into the wall. You're not bleeding into the wall, right? Because I have a black shirt. The back wall is black. Think about these things when you're going into it. On additional tips, last but not least, is always do a test broadcast. I don't care how quick and simple and down and dirty you're doing it. Always do a test broadcast. Get some buddies on the phone with you that know audio or know video, can give you some tips and say, hey, your audio's choppy, your video's choppy, it doesn't look good, you're ugly, go work out, whatever the case may be. Record all your streams if you can. It's especially in a corporate world or house of worship or things like that, even concerts really, I almost always get asked at the end of a show, whether they ask for it or not, hey man, do you have a recording of that? You didn't happen to record that, did you? Or do you have a recording of this? Always record your shows. It helps your client because you can look like the hero when they don't ask for it. It helps you because if you do record it and you may have had some issues or something, you can go back and watch the recording and say, what happened? Did I miss a switch? Did I miss this? Let me know what's going on with it. Create user channels on various platforms to use at the last minute. So this is something that's also comes in very handy. I can't tell you how many times I've walked into a gig. You can see I've walked into a lot of gigs that have been unknowns in my lifetime. So you never know when you walk into some of these corporate gigs or walk into concerts and stuff, if people have thought about all the things that they need to do in order to be able to stream. Streaming is a cool buzzword and people think that it's really easy. Hey, you just walk out with a cell phone and hit record and then it's going to stream to Twitter and we're good to go. It's not always how it works, right? So you want to make sure that you have your own personal channels on YouTube or Facebook or some of these other ones. So just in case they have not thought about how they're going to deliver it, you can say, hey, we'll just stream it to my YouTube channel You can embed that YouTube window on your website. We'll be good to go. I've already got all my settings, blah, blah, blah. I have the ability to help you. So think about that. And then something to go along with that is always have graphic, video, and editing, audio editing capabilities. I use the Adobe Creative Cloud because it covers all of those. It's I think it's $165 a month. You have access to the entire Adobe suite. Again, one of those situations when you go into a corporate event or you go and you're doing an install or something, people will say, man, it'd be really cool if I could get some like bottom thirds or some graphics, or can you take my logo and animate it or do this? Not that you need to be a computer genius, but you want to have the ability to create something as easy as a slide with somebody's logo. Have the ability to do that. It'll make you the hero, I promise. And then last but not least, use quality cable. I realize and I understand that Amazon and Best Buy have cable. Home Depot has cable. When you buy cable and you do this, especially if you do it on a professional level or an install level, spend the money and buy quality cable. It will save you in the end. It's much better to have cable where people are soldering things correctly and it's good conductors than buying cheap crap off Amazon. All right, we're in the home stretch. I got about 5 more slides and then we'll get into some hardware. So streaming setups, I'm going to go through this really quickly just so you get an understanding of what I've been talking about and what the actual signal path is. So mobile sources, this is what happens when you use a mobile source. You have an iPhone or Samsung or whatever you use, an iPad. That device is capturing live content. It's encoding the content, and then through the network, it's shooting it out to these different platforms. Those platforms are then taking that information over their servers and shooting it out to all of these different types of devices to be viewed. Very, very, probably the simplest setup as far as streaming that you can get. This is going into what is a step above that. So let's say you want something better than a mobile device. You want to be able to have, maybe some pan, tilt, zoom cameras, things like that. This is that type of a setup. So with IP cameras, for instance, you have the ability to capture that content and encode it right at the camera and then go straight to the network. With capturing and encoding on IP cameras, you will always need a computer on the front end just to set the settings. But once you get the settings set up, it's usually good to go, right? And then again, maybe in these scenarios, you want to have better audio. So you can use an audio console that has XLR or audio or line level outputs to go right into the camera. It embeds it with the audio, shoots it across the network, and can be received on the other end by a number of devices. Same thing with USB camera. Again, the difference that we've talked about is, as with an IP camera, you can go directly to the network. It may need a computer to do some setup on the front end, but as a whole, it can go directly to the network. And then with USB cameras, you have to have a computer in order to get that captured video encoded properly to get out into the internet. As with computers, which my setup that I have right now is using, I'm using a audio source that has USB output going directly to my computer, and I'm using that as my audio source and delivering it to you. This is another setup that is just basically using a capture device, showing you the different ways that you can do it. So you can have cameras that are going to a video switcher. The video switcher may have an HD SDI output that would hit a capture device. That capture device would then go to a computer and go out to the internet to be hit by other devices. And then this is the way that it would work if you're using an encoder. They would go into that encoder. Again, Data Video actually has these encoders built into the switchers now, so you can bypass this whole part of having it go out to an outboard encoder and go directly from the switcher, and then go out to the internet to be received by some other devices. This is actually the setup that, basically the setup that I'm using right now. So I'm taking a Data Video switcher, and I have audio coming into it. And then I'm going directly from this switcher out to these different platforms and through Zoom to be able to show you guys. So there's no middleman, there's no encoder, there's no capture device required because it's built into the switcher. And I am using a computer just to control the stream settings on here. Excuse me. So this is, as far as what my camera setup is, this is what I'm utilizing right now. And I think it's really cool to show this to you guys because it's a really neat system if you don't have the ability to have 5 different camera guys, and you don't have, you know, the ability to have, you know, PTZs and stuff like that everywhere. This is a really cool setup. So what this is on the left side is where the camera is going into. It's called a KMU 100. It's a device by Data Video. So what it does is it takes a single 4K camera, excuse me, excuse me, it takes a single 4K camera, brings it into this device, and what it does in the device is it allows you to take shots within that 4K sensor that are at 1920 by 1080, and it can give you 4 individual camera shots and give those as outputs through HD SDI. And if you look on this device as well, let's see if I can get my pointer here. This device right here is actually a joystick controller. So what I can do is those 4 different camera shots that I have inside the 4K sensor, I can utilize this device as though it's a PTZ camera controller. So I can move those windows around the actual 4K sensor to get different camera shots. So let me explain this to you. I'm going to swap back over to my camera. So this is coming through the KMU, and this is a 1080 signal that I'm sending you, but this is the entire 4K frame that I'm sending you. So inside of this frame, what I'm able to do with the controller, which is this device right here I'm using, I'm actually able to go through and set up some different camera shots in the sensor. So I have my main shot here. I have a close-up shot, same, only using one camera. It's just zooming in on or cropping in on that image. This is my third shot, same camera again, just moving to a different side of the 4K image. And then this is my fourth shot, right? So within this 4K camera, I can get 4 different shots. So it's kind of cool, again, if you're doing a small stream, you know, in a small room or a studio setting, you can use 1 or 2 4K cameras and make it look like there's 8 different cameras there. So kind of a cool setup. So going back to my slides real quick, what I'm doing, I'm using that. I'm taking 4 HD SDI cameras and going directly into the data video switcher. The data video switcher has switching and graphics capabilities built into it, but also has an encoder built directly into it. So I can go from that encoder directly out to the internet. So what I'm doing here, I'll show you guys really quickly the way that my setup is I'm going through the camera processor, which is down here, into the data video switcher with HD SDI, and I'm using the streaming output, but I'm also sending a HD SDI feed out to this little device right here, which I'll show you, which is the Marshall HD SDI to USB 3.0 capture device. So I'm taking this, going directly into my Mac, and that's how I'm getting the stream out to you guys through Zoom right now. So that's the end of my slides for the first part of this. So now we're going to kind of move to the hardware setup. Before I do that, I'm going to go through and open it up for questions really quick if you guys have anything. And we can move on after that. I'm just going to read if there's anything, any questions on here. Thank you for the informative session on streaming. Do you recommend any sites or resources that provide background music for live streams? How can we get right so streams and videos don't get muted, i.e. Spotify playlist? That's a very good question. So the thing to think about, especially with certain streaming platforms, YouTube being probably the worst out of all of them, is when you are playing any type of music through YouTube or through a streaming platform, most of them have now partnered with a lot of the record labels to run algorithms in the background that can sense if somebody is playing copywritten music. So that being said, what you need to do first of all is whatever music you're playing, it either needs to be open source or you need to have permission from the artist. If you are going into an event where you are actually streaming the artist or you are working with an artist that's playing that music, you need to notify YouTube or this channel and say, I'm doing this event, I'm working with the artist, I have clearance. And most of the time that's all you have to do with YouTube and some of these other guys, but you need to go through that process. And even YouTube specifically, because I've had more issues with it than anybody, they have very, very good algorithms. I had a stream years ago I was doing, and it was all of my audio was muted going out to the audience, and there was one unmuted microphone on a snare drum, and it was picking up a ludicrous song that they were playing as an opener song, and they cut my stream because of it. They knew what it was. They said I'd violated copyright, and they hit me for it. So I had to immediately scramble and go, sorry, that was opening music. I'm actually streaming this artist. Here's my verification from you guys, and they reopened it. But always think about that on the front end. Most companies that offer video content, image, like Shutterstock, things like that, they offer royalty-free playback opening music that is just blanket bed music. So you can always go buy that type of stuff from them, create your own. You know, there's a lot of free stuff like that out there that's readily accessible and available. Another question we had, an email with the information would be extremely appreciated. Yeah, so I can send, I'll send some information on that out when I send out the follow-up to this, so you can understand what to look for and a couple of sources for some playback music and stuff like that. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to move over to doing software setup really quick for some of the cameras, so we can show you guys how to do some of these setups. What I'll do first is go through some of the gear that I have here so you can have a better understanding of what we're actually using and how I'm doing setup. So I mentioned the camera setup that we had through the data video switcher over there. What I'm doing for audio, again, I'm using a UI24R. It's a rack mount 24 channel mixer, has multiple outputs, and then it also has USB over here, has USB playback, it has USB capture, and it also has USB output, so you can use this to do multi-tracking or use it as DAW control and things like that. The cool thing about it is that it has Wi-Fi and network integrated into it, so you can use it a number of ways. One, you can connect to it pretty easily with an iPad, which is what I am doing right here. You can connect to it with its own Wi-Fi settings, connect directly to it with an iPhone and change it that way. You also can connect directly to it with an HDMI touchscreen. So if you have an HDMI touchscreen, has USB on the side of it, you can plug it directly in and it automatically formats the window so you can use the touchscreen as a mixer platform. Really cool stuff. So I'm utilizing this, sending audio out through the USB and receiving it to you guys. On here, I've got a few different types of cameras just to kind of run through them and explain to you what they are. This is just a standard, what we call a standard block camera. So this particular model happens to be a 4K. It's called the BC200 from Data Video. So looking at this, you can see it's aluminum, very, very robust, super easy to use, super easy to set up. It has slots on the bottom so you can put it on tripod blocks. You can put lights on top of it, a lot of things like that. It has really large lens and sensor on it. And then on the back, it's got HDMI, it has power button, and then it has dip switch settings for resolution and things like that. But you also can get into it with a web-based interface and make some of those changes directly inside the camera. So stepping up from there, as far as 4K cameras, this is one from Marshall. This is actually kind of a large one. This is their new 12G HD SDI 4K camera, and it's true 4K, so it's 4096. So a really solid camera, and it utilizes CV type lenses that you can find from Marshall. They have a lot of Cineprime lenses in there. So on the back side of this, it's got 12G HD SDI, it has HDMI, and then it has a multi-pin connection, which I'm in love with that they've done now. Now with this multi-pin connection, you have a whip that comes out that can do your connections for power, for video, and it can also do your audio connection. So you can actually input audio into this and embed it out the 12G HD SDI line. They have a little brother to this. It's called the CS380, which is the camera that I'm using right now that you're seeing. So it's about half the size of this body size. And really the main difference is this can do 4K 60 frames at 12G. The other one can do 4K 30 frames at 6G. So a little bit less capabilities. This is a hardware encoder from that Data Video used to make. They don't make it anymore, but I just wanted to kind of show it to you so you could understand what hardware encoders kind of look like when you see them. So this particular one, and this is pretty typical of most hardware encoders that you find on the market these days. It'll usually, on the back side of it, let's start there first, it'll usually have a network connection, HDMI or HD SDI. Sometimes you get lucky and they have a loop through so you can see an outboard monitor. And then they usually have audio connections. This one has an input and an output for audio. On the front side of this, which a lot of them have this now as well, is you have, this one has an SD card slot and it has USB. So you can use a USB thumb drive or hard drive to connect to it to record. And then there's two buttons on here, one for streaming and one for recording. So for this particular one, you can do streaming and recording synchronously or asynchronously. So you can use it straight as a recorder if you want to, or straight as a hardware encoder if you want to. So a lot of capabilities there with this. And then stepping over to this camera, this is a PTZ camera, but it's an IP PTZ camera. So the reason that I show this one before the encoder is because this camera basically has this device built into it, like we'd mentioned. So has a network connection built into it. It still has some HDMI and some HD-SDI output so you can monitor it. But you can take this camera, do some setup on it, which I'll show you in just a second, and go straight out to the internet. And then last but not least, I'm going to show you guys this device, because if you're ever doing any mobile streams, this is the device to have. So this is a device by Netgear that I don't sell, but ours is through AT&T. It's a 4G mobile Wi-Fi unit. So the reason that I like this is, number one, it's 4G, it's super fast. It has dual networks on it, so you can do 2.4 or 5 gigs. And my favorite feature about this is that it has a hardwired network connection on it, which is very rare to find in these devices. So the cool thing about this is that if you have like a mobile streaming setup that you use, or like a rack that's built or anything like that, you can take what would normally be your network output to go to a building network. If you don't have a building network and you're mobile or remote, or you're at a festival or something, you can go directly to this and you don't have to change your setup, right? So really, really cool device to be able to have there. So moving along, what I'm going to do now is go over to software and start showing you guys some of these setups for a couple of different devices. The first one I'm going to walk you through really quickly is what the setup looks like for most IP cameras. And then I'm going to show you an encoder setup. And then I'll show you how you take the encoder and go to Facebook or YouTube and get that information and get it into an encoder. And then if we have some time, I'll also do the same through some software really quickly. So moving over to software, this is for another PTC 140 that I have here from Data Video that I'm just going to go back to the main page so you can kind of see how I sign into this thing. So typically you'll have a front page like this, and what this is, I have the camera connected through Cat5 to a switch, which is going out to the internet, and then I'm connected to that switch, and I'm actually connecting directly to the camera to make settings for it. So once I do this, I should not ever have to do it again in order for me to be able to get it to stream, right? So with this camera, what you typically get is you'll typically get a preview window like this. And with this particular camera, as I mentioned, it allows you to do a main and a secondary stream. So this is what my main stream looks like right now. If I click this button right here, it's going to give me my my secondary stream. So it flips between the two. And then as you can see on here with this, I also have some PTZ settings, right? So I can go in and move the camera around. I can set my autofocus mode on different settings. And then I can also save some presets. So on the configuration side, this sets up just like a normal hardware encoder would set up. So the first thing that I look at is my audio configuration. With audio, again, these are your most popular that you see: MP3, AAC, and then G.711A. So I'm using AAC. My sample rate on this, I'm just going to go with 48, and then sample bits is 16. I kind of try to keep it middle of the road for sample and my bit rate. And then I want this to go out as a stereo channel, because why not? You can set this to mono if you want to. So once you do that, you just save it, and then you'll see this window pop up in the bottom right corner. It says that I've made these changes. You'll typically see this as well where it says parameters may need to be restarted. Sometimes when you make certain configuration changes within an encoder, it will force you. It's just like a computer in a way that when it makes network changes and certain configuration parameter changes, it requires you to reboot the device. So what I'm going to try to do is not make changes too much where I have to reboot it, because it'll take it a minute. So on the video encode side, as I mentioned, this has the ability to do a mainstream and a substream. My mainstream, I'm capturing at H.264. My profile is the different settings that I have for this. So there is what's called a baseline profile, a middle profile, and a high profile. And that's just the level of content capturing bit rates and things like that you want the camera to have. So my mainstream, I want it to be high profile. My substream, I'm going to have it middle profile. My image size, that's my resolution size, is going to be 1920 by 1080 for my mainstream. I'm going to drop it to 720 for my substream. And then my rate control. This is something that I didn't talk about, but it's definitions of what rate control is. So this is bit rate. So the two different settings are CBR, which stands for constant bit rate, and then VBR, which stands for variable bit rate. So the difference between the two is that if you need to have a constant setting because you don't know what your bandwidth is, or you don't know what your network speed is, and you want to ensure that no matter what, the stream is locked in, it's going to have a certain amount of bandwidth, and that's what it's going to use, and it doesn't need any more or any less than that. And the same thing on the record side. You need to have the lowest amount of recording space that you could possibly use. That's where you would use constant bit rate. So I would choose CBR. I would lock it into these settings, and it wouldn't change. That's what you get. With variable bit rate, what it does is it analyzes network, and it gives you it analyzes the incoming picture, and it also analyzes on the other side, and it gives you the best bit rate for what the network can take. So if you have the ability to stream at a much higher, a much better bit rate, it will up the bit rate speed in order to compensate for that. So there's a catch-22 with both of them. As mentioned, with the variable bit rate, you want to make sure that you have a very, very solid connection and good bandwidth. If you don't have that, stay with constant bit rate. But variable bit rate typically will always do the work to give you the best picture. All right. Image quality, there's a couple of different selections on here that I think are pretty self-explanatory from worst to best. And then there's also bitrate settings, frame rate settings, and then interval settings. So bitrate on this particular device, you kind of max out at 4960. That's as high as you can go with this particular camera. Some allow you to go more, but I think that they keep this at a somewhat lower level than most cameras to make sure that you always have a good output picture. Frame rate, this is something, again, that comes into consideration for the amount of bit rate and the amount of bandwidth that you need. For some reason, this is set to 50, which it shouldn't be. Let me set this to 30. And then we can change this. And you can see that on 30, I keep these kind of the same. And my bit rate on my subscreen, I've dropped it a lot lower because I don't want it to have a ton of bit rate in order for you to see my subscreen. The frame rate intervals is a little difficult to explain, but basically what it does is there's information when a capture is happening between what's going on and what is actually captured in the frame rate, right? So let's say that you're shooting at 24 frames. Well, there's a lot more motion that's happening that can be captured in 24 frames, right? So what this frame rate interval is it's saying between those two frame rates, all that information that's not there, how much of that do I want to capture? Do I want to capture all that, or do I want to keep the frame rates really close, or do I want them to be staggered like they normally would be? So what this basically does is it takes an image and it makes sure that it stays smooth when you're viewing it and it's captured smoothly. All right, I'm not going to go into frame minimums either because it's something that would not be very understandable and you'll probably rarely use it. So once I get this all set up and done, I can save this, and then you have the ability to get out and publish this. And I'll show you how we would get this in with an RTMP stream. As far as getting this online, this is where you would go in and input this information to do a stream. So if I wanted this to go directly to the internet, I would more than likely set this up as an RTP. There would be an address or a port that I would put in here, and then I would hit save. And once I set those settings, that would open this camera up to be directly to the network without me having to do any more settings. All right, it makes the camera live. So swapping over to the hardware encoder, which is this device. This is what's actually built into the data video switcher. And then this is also the device that I showed you on the table a few minutes ago, and the cameras, they all kind of have the same sort of functionality. So what happens on the encoder when you come into the main page is it gives you a status of everything going on. You can see that I have my resolution set at 1920 by 1080, 60 frames. My stream settings are all kind of the same thing. And then you can see some information in the RTMP and the RTSP here. I actually have some information from YouTube still saved in here, so it's technically kind of sort of streaming out to that right now. Record settings and record media are down here. This switcher, again, has the ability to put SD cards in it if you want to record. So I don't have that in there right now, so I'm not going to worry about it. Operational mode. Let's jump over here, and I can show you this. So since I'm not recording, I'm setting this up as a stream only. And what I'm wanting to do is I'm wanting to stream this to my Facebook channel or my YouTube channel at high quality as possible. Let's say I'm going to do a concert and I want this to be high bit rate, high bandwidth output. The reason that I use those settings, especially, let's take YouTube for instance. When I stream to YouTube, the way that YouTube distributes a stream is they go and take the content that you're feeding them, it goes to their servers, and they use a service called Akamai, which if Akamai is one of the companies that does web streaming servicing, that if they go down, they would take the entire internet down with them. That's how many servers they have around the country. So they take that information, instead of saying, I'm sending you content from Nashville and it's going to go to your server, and then your server is sending that to the world. They take that content and they're able to ping it to these servers all over the country. So what happens is the content is not centralized around one server. So if I have, 50,000 people in San Francisco that need to see this, I'm going to send that content to a server to service those guys. So when I have more and more of an audience, there's not a bandwidth lapse, or the bandwidth doesn't get bogged down because there's not one server that's outputting all this bandwidth, right? So it's a good service, to a good channel to partner with, because they have the ability to have a lot of flux in their viewership without it having any negative impact on the bandwidth requirements. So kind of a cool thing to have in that world. And I'll talk about just a little bit more later, but Data Video is actually offering a service somewhat like that now, where you'll be able to take a stream, send it to a remote cloud server, and then they do that type of work for you. So instead of you requiring all this bandwidth because people are viewing it through your network portal, you're actually utilizing a cloud service, and they're determining the amount of bandwidth that you need. So you stream to the cloud at a predetermined bandwidth that ensures a great picture, and then they do the work to blast it out to the audience. So things to think about when you're getting into some of these streams. All right, so I'm not going to run through this super in depth, but it's kind of the same settings: resolution, my frame rate, my profile is on high, and then my video bit rate, I'm going right on the bottom side of it. So 1920 by 1080, 4 meg is about as low as you want to go, in my opinion. The high side of 1920 by 1080 would probably be on here. I think you can only go as high as 8 megs, but probably for me it'd be between 8 and 10. My audio bit rate, I'm doing high rate audio output, and then my GOP settings, I won't go into that. So my stream type that I have is RTMP, because that's what is required by Facebook and YouTube. And then my audio off is allowing me for my independent audio input instead of it being embedded over the HD SDI. And then these are my settings. So I'm going to jump over to Facebook really quick to kind of just show you how to navigate to get a stream online. And feel free, if you have questions in this, to throw them in the Q&A. I'm kind of peeking between both windows to kind of show you what's going on. So if I'm going to do a Facebook stream, you typically will have it on a company page like this. At the top, there's a button that's called Publishing Tools. Excuse me. So when I click on that button, there's going to be a section over here that says videos. So when I click on videos, it'll pop up these. These are all the videos that I've published. And then if I want to go in to do a live stream, I'm going to click this button right here that says live. All right. So what happens now is they're going to give me a couple of selections. One is going to be the direct connect, which is using an encoder. And you also have the ability to do a camera. So for instance, if you're doing a very down and dirty, short and sweet stream where you just have a Mac and a US or a HDMI capture device, and you want to do something very quickly, you can go to the camera settings and utilize the capture device instead of having to go through a hardware encoder. Excuse me. If you're using a hardware encoder, this is where you'd use this device. So what you would do is take the server URL. I'm going to copy this, and then I'm going to come over here to my encoder page, and I'm going to input that here. And then on the stream name, it's the stream key over on the Facebook side. I'm going to go over here, and I'm going to copy and paste this. So the cool thing about this is once you do this with an RTMP information, this information is exclusive to your Facebook page, right? So once you copy and paste this information over here, you should not need account and password information. Once you hit apply, that information is saved and logged into the encoder. And then once this is done loading, it's saved that information, then you're ready to start streaming. On this encoder, I have an actual button that allows me to push it once I've got these settings in here, and it will open the streaming. So I'm going to click the start button to pretend that's my main button. And then what should happen, excuse me, is that my streaming device on my switcher is going to open up, and then we should see this turn into a preview window over here on the Facebook side. All right, so for some reason it is giving me a hiccup on the Facebook side. Let me try this one more time. I'm sorry. All right, let's see if I can get this to pop back in again. I apologize. This is a good reason to test your streams before you go live, even though I did this, but to make sure that you have all the proper information in here. Excuse me. All right, so now you can see that I've actually got my preview window set up. So it's receiving it from my encoder directly into Facebook. Most of these software platforms like this will give you a window that generally looks like this, and it gives you some information that's very useful. Number one, your resolution. It's giving you your bit rate. It's giving you your frame rate and your audio side. But notice this right here. It says max supported resolution is 720p. So this is telling me, again, going back to what I said previously, very important information. I'm sending it 1920 by 1080. It's only broadcasting it out at 720. So in order to conserve bandwidth, bit rate, processor speed, all that, I could actually go in, and it would be better for the stream for me to go in and broadcast this from my encoder at 720p. So things to think about before you jump into this and start broadcasting stuff. A lot of these other platforms will have this same type of window over here that give you this preview window, and I'm still not actually broadcasting this. So it gives you the ability to do this setup, to go through and to get everything set up and notify people before you go live with everything. So with this, I'm going to go ahead and just stop this stream on that side, and then we're going to swap over to YouTube really quickly so I can kind of show you how this is set up. So while that's stopping, I'm going to get into YouTube. This is YouTube Studio, which just to know with YouTube, before you have the ability to stream on a channel, you have to ask them permission to be a live streaming partner. So it's very easy. You just go through and set up a YouTube channel, then go to the live settings and request permission. Usually takes 24 hours, but they monitor it for the first 60, 90 days to make sure that you're not, putting up bad content or ripping off music or something like that. So what we do here is we're in the YouTube Studio. I'm going to go to this button that says Create, and it says Go Live. Excuse me. And there's a couple of different settings on here as well. Same thing really kind of that you see with Facebook is that I can go directly from a webcam. Again, if I'm using one of my USB cameras or one of my USB capture devices, that can show up as a webcam and I can utilize it that way. You can do a stream, which is not something that you pre-set up or scheduled or anything like that. It's just going to the internet live right now. Manage gives you the option of taking streaming events and scheduling them on a calendar, and then you can have all of those events set up right here. So this is one that I set up for last week's event, and I could come in here and click on this, and all of my settings are kind of ready to go, right? So kind of the same little setup that you have going on with Facebook. I have a preview window here, and then this is giving me my stream key information. So I'm going to go in here and copy this, and you can see they're in different order than it is with Facebook. So I'm going to come do the stream key first, and then I'm going to do the stream URL. All right. So once we apply this, all right, so that's in, and I'm going to click stream on this, and everything goes well. This will start streaming, and we'll see a preview window here. It'll be should be a little bit delayed because it takes a minute to get the streaming output and for YouTube to start seeing it. There we go. So it's seeing my stream. It automatically gives me my go live setting, and then I'm just going to swap my camera shot so you can see that I'm not double dipping on the software. There's a little bit of latency there because obviously I'm going from where I am all the way through the great wall of the internet, getting out to this stream. So again, same type of thing here. I can go to my stream health. I can see that it's healthy. It can give me some analytics on viewers and stuff, and then it'll also give me my information as far as my latency and things like that, and what my stream resolution and all that stuff is. So that's the long and the short of getting all these devices connected on here. And what the hope is that you guys will be able to take all this information and start a conversation. If you need some additional information as far as your setup, what we would recommend as far as gear and encoders and cameras and things like that, feel free to reach out to me. I'm going to take this this presentation with the slides, and then I have another document which I've put together. I'll see if I can show this to you guys real quick just by sharing my screen. There we go. So you guys should be able to see this now. So this is a document that I've put together that basically has all the different hardware that we have here at Vision2 that's pretty readily available. Everything from simple capture devices all the way up to broadcast switching with encoders. It also covers some video conferencing stuff. So people that are at home by themselves needing like a single person desk solution all the way up to large scale video conferencing or event streaming capabilities. So that being said, I'm going to swap back over here to my screen. And open up for Q&A and see if there's any other questions or anything that I haven't answered. All right, I don't see anything rolling in. If you need any more information or need any help, feel free to give myself or any of our Vision 2 guys a call. I'm gonna throw my slide on here in case you guys want to get my information, copy my information back off here. There we go. But feel free to give me a call anytime or any of our Vision 2 guys, and we'll be able to help you. Thanks again for attending, and look forward to talking to you all in the future. Thanks.